Welcome back, everyone, to the next installment of Silent Hill 2, Born from a Wish. Kidding, don't worry, I'm not going to make the same mistake twice. You're all here for the Silent Hill 2 analysis, and that's just what you're going to get. This sure is a big task, though. Where do we start? Well, we might as well start at the beginning, with James Sunderland. As we all know, James went to Silent Hill because he got a letter from his wife, who has been dead for 3 years, telling him to meet her there. As the game progresses, James repeatedly asks if she could really be dead.
Could you really be in this town?
Especially when he starts to hear her voice.
What the?
James has to go through a lot of trials, each of which give him subtle hints to help him not only realize the circumstances behind his wife's death, but also to help him realize his own character traits. This was demonstrated with the locales within the town, with the people James meets on his way to his ultimate destination, and even with the monsters themselves. During James's journey, he meets 4 people: Angela, Laura, Eddie, and Maria. Each of these people has been brought to Silent Hill, and each are attempting to complete their own missions that Silent Hill has given them. However, these people are integral to James's own mission, though they may not realize it. Let's take a look at these characters more closely. The first person we meet is Angela. She is in a cemetery looking for her mother's grave. She warns James not to enter Silent Hill as there are dangers other than the fog, but James presses on. Angela is a curious case. The next time James meets her is in the apartments, where she is seemingly contemplating suicide as she is lying on the floor holding a knife. She expresses that she couldn't find her mother, which may very well be the reason, or at least part of the reason, that she wants to die. She is extremely distrustful of James, questioning how James could possibly know that her mother was in Silent Hill, even though Angela was clearly looking for her mother in these apartments. Angela expresses that she is tired, and she speaks very slowly. It is not certain, but this may be because of blood loss, for when James takes Angela's knife, it has blood on it. In fact, she offers the knife to James, but when he approaches her, she immediately becomes terrified and defensive. She apologizes and puts the knife down, mysteriously saying, "I've been bad, please don't." This, coupled with the fact that she refers to her mother as Mama, indicates that she may be regressing into her childhood years. It is plainly apparent that she had a traumatic childhood. James doesn't see Angela again until much later in the game, when he's in the underground prison. Angela is being assaulted by the Abstract Daddy, which I had previously referred to as the Doorman. I'll get into Abstract Daddy later. Angela sees it as her father, and after James defeats it, she kicks it repeatedly and finishes it off by smashing it with a TV set. Angela is more defensive than ever, however, and she asserts that James is only being nice to her because men are only after one thing. When James assures her that that's not true, she insists that he's lying, and tells him to fess up, or even beat her like her father did. She calls James a disgusting pig, and she becomes so depressed that she actually starts gagging and retching.
You disgusting pig!
Angela.
Don't touch me!
She finishes by saying that James probably simply didn't want Mary around anymore because he found somebody else, again implying that men just want sex and nothing more. It is important to note that at this point of the game, we can see that the style of the room Angela is in looks noticeably different than the rest of the game, as James sees it. Presumably this is Angela's version of Silent Hill. Instead of her otherworlds being covered in blood, rust, and grime, it is covered with skin and pulsing cylinders going through holes, seemingly representing sexual intercourse. In Angela's case, unwilling intercourse. The last time we see Angela is in the Otherworld Hotel, after James has had his revelation. Angela's otherworld, rather than being flooded, is in flames. There is some sort of skin-covered body in a bed hanging on a wall that she's musing at. The skin seems to be covering the body rather than actually being attached to it, as it seems to be nailed to the bed around the body, trapping the body under it. This once again may represent the rape she endured as a child, as the skin becomes a sort of flesh blanket, preventing outsiders from seeing what is happening under the covers. She mistakes James for her mother and actually has to touch his face before realizing her error.
You're not my mama!
Angela finally confesses that even her mother said that she deserved what happened with her father. When James says that she's wrong, Angela tells him not to pity her, unless of course he intends to save her and take care of her. Upon receiving a silent reception, she says, "That's what I thought." She asks for her knife back, but James refuses to give it to her. She then proceeds up the staircase amid the flames, never to be seen again. Before she goes, however, she makes very clear an important detail about Silent Hill, when James comments on the heat of the flames.
You see it too. For me, it's always like this.
This indicates that the perception of the town truly does vary from person to person, and at this time, James is seeing Angela's Silent Hill, just as he was during the time with the abstract daddy. This helps to explain the way some of the other characters perceive the town. Ultimately, who is Angela? She is just another person who is being tested by Silent Hill, and judging by her exit, it seems that she may not have passed her test, and she may be condemned to wander her fiery hell, remembering her terrible childhood forever. She did prove to be useful to James in a way, however. She dropped the hint that James may no longer have been in love with Mary, and discarded her. Angela only meant this in a way that indicated that James is nothing more than a sex fiend, so her statement was not entirely true. But Angela was more accurate than she may have realized, and James later discovered this the hard way.
No, don't pity me. I'm not worth it.
The next character James officially meets is Eddie. Yeah, he technically sees Laura first, but that incident doesn't exactly count as a formal introduction. James finds Eddie throwing up into a toilet, next door to a kitchen with a mutilated dead body. Eddie claims that he had nothing to do with the body, and that he just ran into this room to evade the monsters roaming the apartment. The next time James sees Eddie, he's in a bowling alley with Laura, eating pizza. Laura makes fun of him and leaves, and Eddie doesn't go after her, despite there being monsters outside. He seems to be in a depressed state, which becomes more evident later in the game.
She said she was fine by herself. She said a fatso like me would just slow her down.
We don't see Eddie until much later, all the way in the underground prison. Now he seems to be really disturbed. This time he claims to have killed in self-defense, but then says that his victim was making fun of him with his eyes, like that other one. Changing his story about the other one indicates that he was lying about not killing the man in the kitchen that we saw much earlier in the game. He also claims to have killed a dog that was also making fun of him. After the rant, he says that he was just joking, but it's plainly apparent that he's lying. And then he says that the dead man, who he just claims to have killed, was dead when he got there, and he heads off alone.
I gotta run.
You're going out there alone?
Yeah.
The last time we encounter Eddie is through a door at the end of a hallway that keeps getting bloodier. Sure enough, we find Eddie with still more bodies. He rants that a person he killed always made fun of him in the past. Eddie rationalizes his murderous intents by saying that corpses can no longer laugh at him, so either people must stop making fun of him, or they'll die. James asks if Eddie's gone nuts, which sets him off, making him think that James was mocking him from the beginning. Eddie runs into the next room, a meat locker, and then exposes that killing a dog was just the beginning for him. The door locks behind James, forcing him to fight Eddie. Eddie does note, however, that he and James are similar in that they're not quite like other people, and that the town called them to it. However, he only wants to fight, and James has no choice but to kill him.
Let's party!
What's going on with Eddie? Well, it seems that, like Angela, he too had a terrible childhood. Instead of becoming a perpetual victim, though, Eddie channeled his frustration into violence. He worked his way up from killing a dog, to killing humans who bullied him, and finally to killing anyone who literally even looks at him the wrong way. He was driven insane, and Silent Hill seems to be putting him through scenarios where he must combat his childhood phantoms. Unlike Angela, Eddie seems to roll with it, though he is clearly still bothered by what he encounters and is generally unwilling to admit that he kills people. Honestly, his being killed seems to be the best possible way out for Eddie, as his rampage could have gone unchecked forever. Also, though Eddie could have never predicted it, he also helped James in a way. After killing Eddie, James realizes that he had killed a human being, and he feels terrible guilt because of it. That guilt will be very important later in the game. Eddie may not have been the most likable character, but he sure had some personality.
Killing a person ain't no big deal. Just put the gun to their head, pow.
The third person James meets on his journey is a little girl named Laura. The first thing she does when James sees her is step on his hand, preventing him from getting a key in the apartments.
When James runs into her later, she is rude to him and refuses to show him a letter that we later learn is from his late wife, Mary. She shouts that James never loved Mary anyway, and runs off. We next see Laura in the aforementioned bowling alley with Eddie, but when James tries to catch her, she hides in Brookhaven Hospital. James finally finds her playing with some teddy bears in one of the rooms, completely unaffected by the horrors around her. She says that she met Mary last year, and James shouts that she's a liar, before composing himself. As I've previously mentioned, Silent Hill seems to change its appearance for the people who enter it, based on some trauma in the past. Laura may not have any personal demons to contend with, which is why she may not see any monsters at all. Therefore, when Laura locks James into the room with two boss monsters, she may have simply been playing a childish trick on James for yelling at her. She's just an innocent kid who dislikes James. She probably would have opened the door if she realized that James was pounding on it not in anger, but in a panic to escape the hell that awaited him. James doesn't see Laura again until he reaches the hotel across Toluca Lake. There, Laura is hiding and scares James by banging a chord on the piano, but she becomes more friendly to James when he admits that he's looking for Mary. She finally lets James read the letter, which is written to Laura by Mary. It tells Laura to give James a chance and not be mean to him, as James is a nice guy once you get to know him. However, the letter seems to have been written very recently, as recently as last week, which makes little sense as Mary died 3 years ago. She prepares to get another letter for James, but realizes she's misplaced it. The difference between this scene and the hospital scene is that she is genuinely concerned about the missing letter this time, so it's not another trick being played on James. The last time we see Laura during gameplay is after James views the videotape in room 312. James tells Laura that he killed Mary, and that the Mary she knew is gone. Laura understandably becomes furious and storms out of the room, leaving James to wallow in his guilt. It is possible to see Laura one more time in the game, but that is only in the Leave ending, where James seemingly adopts her and they walk out of the cemetery together. In all other scenarios, however, the last impression we receive of Laura is that she hates James and will not forgive him. What is Laura's story? She seems to have met Mary within the past year, despite Mary being dead for 3 years. Other than that mix-up of the timeline, she appears to be a genuinely normal kid who was sent by Mary, or possibly Silent Hill, to find James. I'm leaning more toward the possibility of Silent Hill sending her, as the other characters were similarly summoned. Perhaps Laura is supposed to be Silent Hill's gift to James, if he makes the proper decisions. She certainly seems to be leading James to his realization about the mystery behind Mary's whereabouts, as she has important letters from Mary, and she keeps hinting to James that he disliked Mary in the past. Ultimately, whether she came by her own free will or by the will of Silent Hill, she at least seems to be a normal person, which is more than I can say for the last person James runs into.
Me and Mary talked a lot about Silent Hill. She even showed me all her pictures. She really wanted to come back. That's why I'm here.
The last person James encounters is Maria. The first thing James notices is that she looks almost exactly like his late wife, Mary. Even her name is similar. Mary is probably the most well-developed secondary character in the game. She interacts with James more often than everyone else, and even directly follows James around before and during the Brookhaven Hospital level. Her personality is a bit hard to follow at first, but then James comes to understand what direction she's taking with it later. She is seductive in her speech and actions, and she wears more revealing clothing than Mary did. Her resemblance to Mary continues when she feels weak at the hospital and stays on a bed, as Mary spent her last days weak in a hospital. Maria mysteriously reappears in the basement below the basement, after the hospital has turned into its otherworld self, wondering where James has been, why he didn't try to save her from the dangers of the hospital, and saying that James only seems to care about that dead wife of his. She really wants James to care for her, and she makes this very clear, multiple times. Interestingly, she also cares about Laura, and encourages James to find her. Unfortunately, when James is leaving the hospital, he is chased by the terrifying Pyramid Head, who impales Maria just before she can make it to an elevator to safety, which causes James to feel incredible guilt and depression. As strange as it may seem, Maria shows up again in a cell in the underground prison as though nothing has happened. She appears to have no recollection of being stabbed and acts in a calmer fashion, more like Mary. Even stranger, she seems to remember the hallway where she and James were chased, but all she knows is that they were separated. Pyramid Head did not factor into the equation at all, let alone her death. The most bizarre part about the whole thing is that she seems to channel Mary at this point, saying that James was always forgetful, and she recalls the time they spent together at the hotel, where she tells James of a videotape they made.
After that, she returns to normal, and she starts to hit on James, who responds by awkwardly leaving and saying that he'll try to find a way to get her out of there. When James finally does return, he finds that Maria has been killed again. He once more becomes depressed, but strangely utters Mary's name rather than Maria's. James next sees Maria towards the end of the game, just before reaching the hotel roof. Maria is being held upside down and is killed by 2 Pyramid Heads. James feels sadness and guilt again, initially, but then James has a second revelation. His first was, of course, the fact that he killed his wife, as was made evident in the tape that he was sent to see. His second revelation, which occurs to him as Maria is killed for the 3rd time, is that he finally understands his sins of the past, and now he is capable of overcoming them. I'll cover this in more detail later in this video. The last time James sees Maria depends on which ending is acquired. In all but one scenario, Maria is the final boss of the game. She confronts James one last time in the hotel roof, pleading with him to be Mary's replacement, as she could be everything James wanted in Mary and more. But James refuses, saying that only Mary matters to him, and Maria then turns into a monster to be killed one last time, this time by James himself. In the Maria ending, however, the final boss is a vision of Mary, and after James kills it, he meets Maria at the place where they first met, Rosewater Park. Maria coughs, possibly coming down with the same illness that Mary had, and James tells her to do something about the cough, which indicates that the events of the past may start all over again.
You'd better do something about that cough.
Who is Maria? This question is a bit more difficult than it was for the other characters. Maria is definitely her own person who can function by herself without James, as is evidenced by the Born from a Wish scenario. She has her own thoughts and personality, but she seems to be at least partially Mary. Her hometown is Silent Hill, but then again, she seems to know who James and Laura are before having met them. She even wonders why she seems to know them. She interacts with James, but with no one else. We never see her with any other characters, which indicates that she may exist for James and James alone. She may be her own character, but she has this constant desire to be with James. It is entirely possible that Silent Hill, the town, created her, as an adult, shortly before James entered the town. It would explain why she looks like Mary and shares some of her memories. Also, if she is a creation solely for James, it would explain why she is never seen with anyone but James. Ernest doesn't have a corporeal body, so it may be possible that Ernest was a voice in Maria's head, as he warns her about James, though Maria seems to have memories of James already. We know that Laura is a real person because we see her interacting with Eddie, but Maria makes a point of not entering the bowling alley with James, giving the weak excuse of not liking bowling. Maybe she didn't want to enter because the other people wouldn't realize she existed. Sure, she claims to have chased Laura after James leaves the alley, but we don't actually see it happen. We just see her come back to James out of breath. Maria seems to be a mere facsimile of Mary, but she functions in the way that a clone does in a sci-fi movie. It is convinced that it's the real thing, and yet it has a hazy memory concerning its distant past, and it wonders why it's treated differently from other people. Maria exists to try to get James to live in the past. She does this by not only emulating Mary, but also by emulating her in a way that would be more pleasurable to James, namely, she makes herself more sexual than Mary presumably was. Maria is repeatedly killed by Pyramid Head and reborn. She symbolizes death and rebirth. In her final boss form, she sends moths after James, which represent death. However, in her human form, Maria has a tattoo of a butterfly on her hip, which symbolizes rebirth. Maria's repeated deaths are meant to bring James out of his guilty delusions, though this is not so much Maria's doing as, well, again, I'll cover this later. All Maria wants is to be loved by James and to raise Laura. This may be her inner Mary speaking, though she is resentful of constantly being mistaken for Mary, as she is her own person. She is, however, willing to emulate Mary if that's what it takes to bring James to her. At the end of the game, she even dresses in the same clothes that Mary wears in James's photograph. Maria seems to have everything that James could want, with just one exception. She's not actually Mary. With the exception of the Maria ending, Maria becomes so frustrated by James's constant rebukes that she attempts to kill him. It is this final encounter with James, and her final death, that free James from Silent Hill's grasp. It is interesting to note that while Maria wants to be with James and Laura, the player cannot have both. James either gets Laura alone, Maria alone, or neither. Maria is a curious character, and she adds a lot of interesting color to the world of Silent Hill.
So, you're Maria?
I am. If you want me to be.
Now that I've talked about all of the secondary characters, it's about time I covered the creepier entities James meets in Silent Hill, the monsters. Some are more prominent than others, but all of them have their own symbolic meanings. I had said that I wouldn't bother covering the cockroaches and swinging monsters, but I'll go over them for the sake of completion. The first monster I'll discuss is the one that I have by far the least footage of, the Mandarin. This is the strange-looking creature that swings, monkey-style, under gratings James walks over. It is impossible to hit with a melee weapon. It must be shot or avoided. According to the Silent Hill wiki, they symbolize anguish and helplessness, which is why they cannot stand above ground and are unable to escape their confinements. The cockroach enemies, or more likely cricket enemies, as is hinted by the sound they make, are officially called creepers, and they're a bit harder to pin down. Again, according to the Silent Hill wiki, it may be possible that they are simply a manifestation of the town itself, as they appear in Silent Hill 1 and 2. However, they could also represent the amount of power that the town has over James at that point, as there are fewer and fewer as the game progresses. I'm not sure about that explanation, though. The one I'd likely side with the most is that they simply represent feeling small and insignificant, especially when Maria was recently killed in the hospital and James winds up trapped in an elevator covered in creepers. The next enemy is actually the very first one James encounters in Silent Hill, the Lying Figure. These monsters appear to be wearing straitjackets, except that instead of an actual straitjacket, the monster's arms are confined by their own flesh. At first glance, the monsters look like mental patients, or perhaps hospital patients, being confined and writhing in pain and agony, especially when they're knocked to the ground. Being that they're prisoners of their own bodies, they can represent James's internal suffering. The second enemy James encounters is the mannequin. This creature is a strange creation, as it has no head and legs where its arms should be. It has a distorted feminine voice, as is made apparent when it is struck or shot. This, coupled with the mannequin's nakedness, helps to represent James's sexual urges, especially his failure to express them when his wife was in the hospital, as mannequins are, normally, inanimate objects. To make things a bit more obvious concerning their resemblance to Mary, the first time James encounters a mannequin enemy, it is lying behind a real mannequin wearing Mary's clothes. That, and mannequins are also the first of two enemies to be seen being raped by Pyramid Head. The next enemy is almost as iconic as Pyramid Head himself, the nurses. They are first seen in the hospital, as would be expected, but they can later be found in nearby streets. The nurses have no facial features, but they moan expressively. They are also dressed curiously, in miniskirts and tops that reveal their cleavage. On an obvious level, the nurses represent James's times in the hospital with Mary, but their manner of dress couples with the mannequin's appearance to suggest James's sexual frustration. That takes care of the regular enemies, so now we can move on to the 4 boss characters. We'll start small, I think, with the Flesh Lips. These are the strange creatures that James encounters when Laura locks him in one of the hospital's rooms. Flesh Lips are an almost shapeless mass of flesh confined within a rusty metal frame of some kind. They attack James by wrapping their legs around his neck. These monsters can represent sexual imagery once again, as their lips are in the area where the genitalia would normally be. These monsters are a sort of small version of the final boss of the game. The difference with the final boss is that she can send moths after James, once again representing death, but otherwise her attack and even her look is similar to the Flesh Lips. The final boss is also trapped in a rusty frame, and if she manages to get above James's head, she also tries to throttle him, only with a tendril instead of her legs. Just like the Flesh Lips, the final boss's metal frame represents confinement, as Mary was confined to her hospital bed. This next monster is a strange case. It starts as a boss, but is seen 4 more times as a regular enemy in the hotel. It is the Abstract Daddy. James first encounters it when it is tormenting Angela in the underground prison. The Abstract Daddy is a sort of animate version of the bag of flesh that Angela was looking at on the flaming staircase. It looks like a bed with a large human figure in a position of sexual dominance standing over it. The particularly strange part is that the large figure dominates so much that his arms and legs actually penetrate the bed's underside and therefore give the creature mobility as it crawls on all 4s, though it can stand on 2 legs to attack with its mouth. The monster was not meant for James so much as it was meant for Angela, as it represents the time she was raped by her father. There seems to be a smaller figure beneath the larger one that screams, further indicating the act of rape. The smaller figure may actually represent Angela herself, which would make the Abstract Daddy stand for 2 people. Yes, James encounters the creatures by himself in the hotel,
But that may be just a hint that Angela is nearby, as the monsters, again, seem to be meant for her. One thing that I happen to notice is that when James kills the monsters, they deflate and become completely flat, indicating that for James, they were more style than substance. However, in the cutscene where Angela kicks and crushes her abstract daddy, it remains solid, perhaps because it has an actual meaning for her, rather than for James. And now for the creature you've all been waiting for, Pyramid Head. This thing is so deep that it nearly transcends monster status and becomes an actual character in the game. In order to understand Pyramid Head, it is best to see precisely what he does throughout the game, as every action he performs is a meaningful one. Contrary to what the player may perceive, Pyramid Head is not out to kill James. Rather, he intends to send James a message, and that message becomes more blatant every time Pyramid Head makes an appearance. Pyramid Head may very well be Silent Hill's avatar, at least for James, because the town also shapes itself to James's journey, and becomes more expressive as time goes on. James sees Pyramid Head for the first time in the Woodside Apartments. Pyramid Head is standing on the other side of a set of metal bars, and all he does is stare at James and give off a crimson glow. All he is doing at this time is making his existence known. Does James understand what Pyramid Head is supposed to represent yet? No? That's okay. Pyramid Head will try harder to make himself known when the situation calls for it. Not too terribly long afterward, James encounters Pyramid Head again, this time in one of the rooms in the apartments. This time, Pyramid Head is taking action. He is raping two mannequin enemies. James hides in a closet while Pyramid Head finishes his dirty deed. After dragging a mannequin away from the kitchen, Pyramid Head slowly approaches James' location. James shoots at him, which causes Pyramid Head to slowly leave the room. What was the point of all this? Well, Pyramid Head demonstrated to James that he is a sexual creature. Now that we are aware of the symbolism of the mannequins, Pyramid Head, in a sense, just raped two women, or possibly even two representations of Mary. Of course, James may not have been aware of this just yet. Who could think properly with such horrors occurring right in front of him? So far, James probably only realizes that Pyramid Head is a creature of sexual frustration. But how is that relevant to James? Not getting the message yet? That's okay, there's more to come. The final time Pyramid Head appears in the apartments, he is raping a lying figure monster. He finishes just as James enters the room, and then proceeds to attack. This time Pyramid Head has a weapon, his great knife. As we'll see later in the game, Pyramid Head is relatively fast, sometimes even frighteningly fast, but when he wields the great knife, he slows down to a crawl. The great knife can represent Pyramid Head's violent tendencies, and can possibly even serve as a phallic symbol, representing sexual urges at the same time. Appropriately enough, the violence and sexual desires, literally and metaphorically, serve as a burden and slow Pyramid Head down. The great knife may serve another purpose, however. This is the only time in the game when Pyramid Head uses it. Any other time he uses a spear, which can actually be seen as more of a phallic symbol than the great knife. This means that the one time Pyramid Head uses his great knife is when he's locked in close quarters with James. He attacks James, but James would have to basically stand still and give up in order to be actually hit by it. Perhaps this is a sign that Pyramid Head wants to show James that he is violent, but that he does not actually want to kill him, as his attacks are extremely easy to avoid. Once James gets the message that he cannot kill Pyramid Head, nor can Pyramid Head kill him, Pyramid Head leaves the apartment and actually grants James an exit in doing so, as the staircase's flood goes away. The apartment stairway was blocked before, so James could not run past Pyramid Head and miss the intended message. Okay, so Pyramid Head is a creature of sex and violence. But how is this relevant to James? James isn't blatantly sexually frustrated yet in the game, and he certainly isn't violent except for when he has to fight monsters, so what's the message? Well, there's more. James encounters Pyramid Head twice in Brookhaven Hospital. The first time is after James has run out of options, as every unexplored room is locked and the only place he can go to is the roof. After James reads a diary entry, Pyramid Head suddenly shows up, announcing his entrance with the sound made by his great knife dragging along the ground, and he knocks James through a fence and down to the floor below. This can be seen as an attack, but in a sense, it's really not. Pyramid Head struck forcefully because he's a creature of violence, and anyone would have been hurt from the subsequent fall. However, that pain was necessary, as Pyramid Head actually provided James with the path he needed, as James fell behind the locked doors he couldn't previously access. This goes to show that while Pyramid Head is a creature of sex and violence, he is also an unexpected source of help. He is leading James, however forcefully, to go where he needs to go. Again, killing James is clearly not Pyramid Head's intent. It is no coincidence that James meets Maria after his initial encounters with Pyramid Head. It is apparent that James is not getting the message, so Pyramid Head has no choice but to become more forceful in his delivery, and pick an actual target for his violent tendencies.
James and Maria are exiting the hospital via the labyrinthine basement when Pyramid Head shows up behind them. This time, and from now on, he has a spear instead of his great knife, and he is therefore much faster than before. James and Maria run to an elevator to escape, and Pyramid Head gives chase. But curiously, even during gameplay, he has no interest in James, and solely goes after Maria. James makes it to the elevator, but Maria is stabbed and killed. Pyramid Head makes no effort to stop James from escaping. Now James knows that Pyramid Head is sexual and violent, but he focuses his violence on Maria, who is remarkably and mysteriously similar to Mary. Now does James understand? Well, not yet, because he loved Mary. Why is he being tormented by having to watch a replica of his wife die? Well, we're still not done. James gets a more literal message the next time he sees Pyramid Head. James enters the Silent Hill Historical Society, and he happens upon a large painting depicting Pyramid Head prominently among a bunch of tormented prisoners, or possibly even corpses. The painting is called Misty Day, Remains of the Judgment. Now it is clearly apparent that Pyramid Head is a judge, an executor, or possibly both. It is now apparent that Pyramid Head's objective is to punish James, but for what? Well, we know that Pyramid Head is violent and sexual, but how does that reflect upon James? James has ended up feeling uncomfortable and afraid when Pyramid Head showed up, but after Maria died, James exhibited sorrow and possibly guilt for failing to protect her. Later in the underground prison, James sees a stand set up with a noose, with a depiction of two executioners standing on each side of a hanged criminal. The executioners have triangular heads, which hints that they could each be Pyramid Head, and that there may even be two Pyramid Heads. Yes, we know that two show up later, but there's only one now, so perhaps this image is a portent of the future. Interestingly, it is at this stand that James has to insert 3 tablets: the tablet of the gluttonous pig, the seductress, and the oppressor. It is obvious that the gluttonous pig is supposed to be Eddie. It seems that the seductress would represent Maria, as she attempts to seduce James all the time, but I'm of the opinion that it refers to Angela, as a lot of her childhood was sex, whether she wanted it or not. The oppressor likely refers to James, so James has to acknowledge his own sin as well. I say this because at the end of the part of the underground prison where James has to keep jumping down holes, he finally comes across gravestones that have Eddie's, Angela's, and James's own name on them. This is why I think that the tablets correspond to those people, which would mean the seductress is Angela rather than Maria. James also takes a big step in self-realization by acknowledging his own grave, and therefore his own sin, and jumping down into it. The next time James sees Pyramid Head in person is in the underground prison, before he has the important talk with Maria about the videotape. Pyramid Head patrols a small hallway, and he will attack James if he wanders too close. But Pyramid Head will not actually follow James. Connected to this hallway is a room that has Pyramid Head's great knife, which James can claim for himself. This part of the game shows that James is becoming more like Pyramid Head. He suffers emotional blows from both Maria herself and her death. These symbolize sex and violence, respectively. We have seen how the great knife burdens Pyramid Head, and when James equips it, it burdens him as well. Pyramid Head started by reflecting James, but now James is starting to reflect Pyramid Head. In fact, after James finds the key to Maria's cell, Maria is already dead. How she was killed is uncertain, but it may have something to do with Pyramid Head or James's slight transformation. Once again, James feels sorrow and guilt as Maria's death reminds him of Mary's death. This is a step in the right direction, but James isn't quite there yet. What we do know is that Maria and Pyramid Head are becoming two sides of the same coin, each trying to tell James where to go, but in different ways. When James finally comes to his grave after all of this, he seems to have acknowledged that he has become at least a little like Pyramid Head, and that he is a violent, sexually frustrated oppressor. James has almost had his breakthrough, but he has a little bit further to go. As James approaches the end of the underground prison, he is forced to kill Eddie. Pyramid Head does not show up here, but the important thing is that James explicitly makes his guilt known, as he is shocked that he killed a human being.
I killed a human being.
This realization is important regarding his revelation later, but there is something else that I did not show you during the playthrough, as the thought never occurred to me. If James should check his letter from Mary, which he's had since the beginning of the game, at this point he will find it blank. This hints that James never received a letter from Mary in the first place, and that he either chose to go to Silent Hill of his own free will, or the town summons James using the excuse of a letter from Mary. Whatever the case, Silent Hill got what it wanted, and now that James has come this far, the pretense of the letter is no longer necessary. It is now a guarantee that James will go to the hotel, which is the purpose of this entire expedition. The final time James sees Pyramid Head is in the Otherworld Hotel, just before the final boss of the game, and after James has watched the videotape in room 312, and realized that he's been tormented by Pyramid Head because he was trying to demonstrate that James was a sexually frustrated man who exerted violence on his wife and killed her in his frustration. This time there are two Pyramid Heads holding Mary upside down in a cage, much like she appears in her final boss form. At this point it is safe to say that James realizes that the first Pyramid Head represents James's murder of his wife, but what is the second Pyramid Head doing here? It is entirely possible that this is the specter of Eddie, the only other human being that James has killed. These two Pyramid Heads represent both of James's murders, and they will continuously come back to haunt him as the first Pyramid Head did, except that this time it is different. James needed Pyramid Head to punish him for his sins, but now James has had his revelation, and both the old and new Pyramid Heads are no longer necessary, as is evidenced by their slowly backing away from James when he stands up to face them. When James demonstrates that he is capable of literally fighting his fears, the Pyramid Heads realize that they are of no further use and end their own existence. James needed to be able to face his fears in order to confront the final boss of the game. Only by killing the Pyramid Heads could he open the door that they guarded, which leads to the hotel roof. It is here that James faces his last challenge, killing his past in order to be able to live in the present. Whether the past that he kills is Mary or Maria does not matter. Either he does away with the specter of Mary and he could live a satisfying life with Maria, albeit with a lesson not necessarily learned, or he does away with Maria, who represents James's ugly past, and he could live his life as he sees fit, whether that means trying to bring Mary back, living a life with Laura, or simply killing himself. It's all up to James, and that's what matters. Pyramid Head, you might be one of the most terrifying creatures in Silent Hill, if not any game ever, but damn it, James couldn't have done it without you. Ladies and gentlemen, this was my analysis of Silent Hill 2. It is difficult to analyze James from the beginning of his journey to his revelations at the end because his development is dependent on the other characters and even the enemies of the game. In a sense, this entire analysis has been about James, as his journey would not have been possible without Angela, Laura, Eddie, and especially Maria and Pyramid Head. Therefore, I can say with confidence that James has, however indirectly, been analyzed just as the rest of the game has been. I had a lot of fun reading into the game and making this video, and I hope you had fun watching it. Until next time, everyone. Oh, hey, one more thing before I forget. Did you hear that bit of gibberish in the middle of the song, about at the part in the montage where Pyramid Head stabbed Marie in the elevator? Sounded like Laura's voice actor. Well, the song is called The Reverse Will. What do you think happens if I play that part of the song in reverse,